Ladies and gentlemen of the Ravens flock, my name is Christopher Linfont, bringing you another edition of the Preview and Prediction series here on the Baltimore Feather YouTube channel. Of course, you can check out the condensed version of Preview and Predictions, the write-up, the more eloquent version, in my opinion, on BaltimoreFeather.com, where you can find also the latest and greatest Ravens news and opinion articles every week. And here we are in Week 3, midway through the preseason. Still with a lot of unknowns, unchecked boxes for the Baltimore Ravens and their roster. So obviously, if you know the preview and predictions article that I always do, usually we give keys to the game and how the Ravens can win a game. But in the preseason, we don't do that because obviously, aside from holding this streak for the longest, most consecutive wins in preseason history at 15 now, it doesn't really matter if the Ravens win or lose. What matters is the Ravens find guys they can rely on in the future to be integral parts, contributive parts to the team, and that's exactly what we're looking for here in preview and predictions as well. So, without any further ado, let's head right on in and take a look at some of these players we need to watch against the not the Baltimore Eagles, the Philadelphia Eagles, and some positional battles that will rage on here, continuing through Week 3. And the first player we're going to talk about is Cyrus Jones. Now, Cyrus Jones is really coming into his own here, not only as a return specialist, but specifically as a cornerback here. Now, obviously, if you're a Baltimore Ravens fan, I mean, unless you're living in the dark, you know that Tavon Young, the starting slot cornerback, the guy who just signed an extension with the Ravens not too long ago, is almost certainly out for the season with a neck injury. The neck injury is not life-threatening, it's not career-threatening, but it's almost certainly going to end his season here. So what does that mean? The Baltimore Ravens now need to find someone who can fill in at slot or nickel cornerback here. And that man right now appears to be Cyrus Jones. Now, Cyrus Jones has had a great play throughout the preseason. Wink Martindale really likes what he brings to the table. The secondary coach is also, John Harbaugh likes what he brings to the table. So Cyrus Jones here really has a chance to shine. He was probably going to make the roster anyway as a return man, but now has a chance to contribute at another position as well if he starts as a slot cornerback. And that's actually very important to the Ravens anyway, because it does allow them to fill out two positions on the depth chart with one player, which is always a major benefit for any NFL team, because you can stash in another guy on your roster that you couldn't have beforehand. So moving on to what we want to see out of Cyrus Jones, I'm really looking for a solid game at the cornerback position, not so much a return specialist because we know already what he's going to do. So I want to see him maybe get 3 or 4 tackles, at least 3, a pass deflection, and no passes let up. I mean, if it's a perfect pass from whoever the quarterback is for the Eagles, who even knows anymore, if it's a perfect pass, I mean, it's not going to be his fault at that point. You can't blame him, but we don't want to see him get burned. We don't want to see him lose a battle with a receiver for the ball. Now, I think he will perform well. He has performed well in the previous few games, previous couple games. So we'll see how he does in Week 3 against the Philadelphia Eagles. And someone else we're going to look at is Pat Ricard. Now, Pat Ricard, fullback / defensive tackle, third year here as a Baltimore Raven from Maine. Project Pat has been having a fantastic preseason. If you're watching the preseason, he has been the MVP of the preseason so far. Stellar performance at defensive tackle across the 2 games. Great performance at fullback. Awesome blocks, as usual, from Pat Ricard. And he's another one of these guys that can play 2 positions, fill out 2 depth chart positions with one body, which, again, gives the Ravens a major opportunity to pad their depth chart, their roster, with more guys than normal. Now, Pat Ricard, we're looking to basically not see if he's going to make the roster anymore, because I wholeheartedly believe that he's going to make the roster without a doubt at this point. It's more of, is he going to start? Is he going to, how much in the rotation is he going to get? How much time in the rotation is he going to get? Because obviously you have Brandon Williams and Michael Pearson there at defensive tackle. He's not going to start over them, but he could really get in there a lot, quite frequently, honestly, and relieve one of the two a lot. And really, it really does show how deep this defensive tackle group is. And of course, again, with him, he also plays fullback. He's going to start fullback no matter what. And the Ravens, they're one of these teams that uses a fullback not too often. Well, they use it a lot, but not in every single play. But most of these other teams don't use him. They want to find a guy who can be a value at fullback, and Pat Ricard is that value in all honesty because he plays defensive tackle as well. So we want to see him maybe get a tackle for loss and a crucial block at fullback in this upcoming game and really start to see him push for a higher rotational value at the defensive tackle position. And, of course, he's already going to start fullback, so there's no real competition there for him at this point. Moving on, we're going to talk about Anthony Averett, a guy who's really been a Jekyll and Hyde here, as I mentioned in the article in the previous few weeks for the Baltimore Ravens. And what I mean by that is he's been really up and down for us. He's had some very, very good moments in the preseason, but he's also had some moments that have made me, kind of scratch my head. And he's not been terrible. He's not been awful by any stretch of the imagination. But it's not always been pretty with him. And he's going to have to, improve here if he wants to eventually become a starter in this Ravens group. He's really the fourth cornerback right now on this depth chart, especially with Tavon Young gone. He's going to be able to come in here and have a bigger role than normal, but he's going to have to play better than Cyrus Jones, because if Cyrus Jones proves to be a better cornerback than Anthony Averett at this point, Averett will be pushed down on the depth chart. I could see Averett potentially starting as the slot cornerback if the Ravens wanted to put him there. He is 5'11", so he's about that height for a slot guy. He will have to improve, though. He's been off and on. He's been burned a few times, but he's also had some nice plays in there as well. So we'll have to see what he can do. What I'm looking for Anthony Averett in this preseason game against the Philadelphia Eagles, I want to see him make about 3 tackles, a pass deflection, no passes let up. Basically, do either what Cyrus Jones is doing, because right now, if you ask the Ravens who they felt more comfortable with starting as a cornerback, regardless if it's slot or not, just as a cornerback, it'd probably be Anthony Averett. He cannot get outplayed by Cyrus Jones, so he's going to have to either outplay Cyrus Jones or play to Cyrus Jones's abilities here in this third preseason game. Moving on now, we're going to talk about some of these battles here instead of individual players. I want to talk about the left guard battle, and a big wrench was thrown into the battle this week as Jermaine Illuminor is questionable, but I don't expect him to play at all in this preseason game, and that's because in Monday's practice, joint practice with the Eagles, he was carted off the field. So obviously not a good sign for Jermaine Illuminor, the former, I believe, 5th or 6th round pick out of Texas A&M. I mean, he has been a guy who's been pretty disappointing for the Ravens, in all honesty. They thought that he could potentially be a starter at left guard or maybe even tackle. He played a little tackle at some point, but it never really panned out. He never looked good at all, really, on the field. Lots of missed blocks, lots of blown opportunities for him. But he's really come into his own this year, and he's not been terribly great, in all honesty, but he's been serviceable at the left guard position. The Ravens were favoring him, and now he's got carted off the field, questionable to play. I don't think they're going to play him at all. And that means the former starter, the guy I really think should be the starter at left guard, James Hurst. If you ask Ravens fans what they think of him, a lot of people are going to tell you James Hurst isn't good. But I think James Hurst provides a lot of value for this Ravens team here because he can play guard, he can play tackle, he can play multiple positions. I'm convinced he could even play center. And they just signed him to an extension. Financially, it would make sense. Sign him to not an extension, but a new contract last year. So financially, it would make sense. But of course, you've also got Ben Powers in there, a guy they drafted 4th round, someone they like. They have a lot of confidence in Ben Powers developing. And it feels like we keep talking about this battle, but I mean, you had to incorporate it again now that the Ravens have this problem here at the left guard position with Illuminor gone down. So what do we want to see? We want to see someone kind of emerge out of this group this week, whether it's if Illuminor plays, if it's Illuminor, if it's James Hurst, or it's Ben Powers. Someone has to come out of here acting like they can be the left guard, not just be serviceable, but be capable of becoming, a good left guard, someone the Ravens can depend on. We don't want someone who's just plain serviceable at left guard. We want someone who's going to anchor that position. Frankly, I don't know if any of these guys can do that right now. I think, again, your best bet might be James Hurst up here. But in reality, it's not my call to make, and we have to see what happens. And Illuminor has been okay. He's been progressing. He's looked better than normal for him. But this injury does throw a wrench into things for the Ravens. Now, moving on to another battle we're going to watch. Obviously, Kenneth Dixon right here and Justice Hill are at it again. Last week, it was a battle between these two, and Justice Hill came out on top. I think he was one of the best performances of last week. I believe he had 10 rushes for 49 yards last week. That's a 4.9 yard average. A touchdown in there as well. He really showed off his speed. And Kenneth Dixon, he did get hurt in last week's game. He came back into the battle, but he just did not look like the Kenneth Dixon we saw last year. Now, granted, it was one game in the preseason, but it wasn't a very good showing for Kenneth Dixon. And he is on the verge of this roster, of making this roster, of being cut from this roster. We don't really know. He's on the bubble. If the Ravens keep four running backs, which is now a lot more possible with Cyrus Jones playing two positions, Pat Ricard playing two positions, you could definitely see Kenneth Dixon and Justice Hill being kept, both of them here. But if they keep three, then Kenneth Dixon's the odd man out immediately, because they're not going to cut Mark Ingram. They are not going to cut Gus Edwards. They are not going to cut the man they just drafted, Justice Hill, in the 4th round. They're going to cut Kenneth Dixon if they're cutting anybody. Plain and simple. So Kenneth Dixon really has to show the Ravens that they need to keep him more than anything. It's not, he can be safe and sit on this roster and lollygag all preseason. He really has to fight, because even if Justice Hill doesn't do very well, it doesn't mean that Kenneth Dixon is automatically going to make this roster. He has to show that he's worthy of making the roster. And for a guy who gets injured a lot, who's not dependable to stay on the field, not really his fault most of the time, it's going to be difficult for him to do that, to be able to prove to the Ravens that they absolutely need to keep him on the roster with limited space available. So what am I looking for in this matchup between these two guys? Someone to kind of come out on top here. Dixon, he has to not get injured again. He has to be, I would hope he gets 5, 6, 7, 8 carries, somewhere in there where he can take a few hits, show he's still durable. At least 4 yards per carry. Last game it was 2.3. Atrocious numbers there. From Justice Hill, we want to keep seeing success. We want to see him basically do the same thing he did last week, maybe a little bit less, because it was, a pretty good performance from him. But, tear up some defenses on some plays and see what he can do in there. Who do I think is going to come out on top? It's going to be difficult to say Kenneth Dixon, because Justice Hill is really the guy the Ravens are putting their faith in right now. But if Kenneth Dixon does come out here and do some really good things in this 3rd preseason game, I could see him potentially stealing the show out of Justice Hill's spotlight. But it would be very difficult for him to do that, because Justice Hill obviously is coming off of a very good game and will probably be tested a lot too, to see if he can continue that success in week 3 here. Now, moving on to our last positional battle here. Obviously, it's the inside linebacker position. We are talking about this position nonstop this offseason. And just like the left guard position, we got a wrench thrown right into it to mess up basically all expectations. And that's because Chris Board got a concussion in last week's game against the Green Bay Packers. Now, a lot of people expect him to not play at all again in the preseason. And this is a major problem for the Baltimore Ravens, because Chris Board was projected to start next to Patrick Onwuasor. So now we have a projected starter who's only in his 2nd year, was undrafted, not playing in potentially the final 2 weeks of the preseason. That's a problem. So obviously they have Kenny Young in there. They have Alvin Jones in there as well, who could be a depth guy for them. They signed Donald Payne, the inside linebacker, not expected to make the roster, but he's still signed. Chris Board should be back sometime around week 1, week 2. But to give him the starting position after he comes back is going to be difficult for the Ravens, especially if, let's say, Kenny Young goes off on a tangent here and demolishes another quarterback. Whoever the Eagles quarterback is at this point, who even knows? But let's say he demolishes him tomorrow night on a huge play. It's going to be very difficult to say, Kenny Young, you can't play when he's, hitting quarterbacks left and right here. So I think Kenny Young is really the most obvious player here to come in and usurp the title from Chris Board. I don't think it's going to be Alvin Jones. I think he's more depth. I don't think it's going to be Donald Payne. He's really just signed to be here for the rest of the preseason. And obviously, Patrick Nwasso is already going to start. So my overall prediction, I think the Ravens are going to win this, extend the winning streak to 16, 39-3 victory over the Eagles. I just feel like with the Eagles quarterback situation, not knowing what's going to go on, and the proven depth of the Ravens squad here, I think we're going to get an easy win tomorrow night in Philly. Well, not tomorrow night, actually, because this video is being recorded the day before, but it will be published on the day of the preseason game. So I guess tonight. I'll be at the game wearing my Ravens purple. Please pray for me so I don't get mugged in the streets of Philadelphia, because these Philly fans, as much as we love these Philly fans, I got to say, Philadelphia got a soft spot for these Philly sports fans and their teams, but man, they can be brutal. So that's it for today's episode of Preview and Predictions. You can find more on BaltimoreFeather.com. Of course, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit the notification bell. Make sure you get all of the videos when they come out. Preview and Predictions, Nest Talk, you name it, we've got it for you. This is Chris Linfont of the Baltimore Feather, the best and most elite Baltimore Ravens blog on the entire internet, signing out.